The Dawnbringer Chronicles, Part 10. Last Flight of the Grimmbar. "Home port bound then, sir?" asked Captain Thrummond. Admiral Loki Cruffin took one last swig of Haskar, his last flask of pure Ziflin amber. Damn right it was time to see the windswept city again, and more importantly, its alehouses. "Aye," he said. "No more room here even for a whiff of ether gold anyways. It's been a profitable venture, Captain. I'll be putting through my request for your commendation as soon as we dock." Thrummond's moustache twitched ever so slightly, which for him was an extravagant gesture of delight. The captain of the Grimmbar was not a gregarious sort, but then again, Cruffin wasn't paying him for his winning personality. "Won't be sad to leave this place," said Thrummond, nodding down over the gunwale towards the settlement of Veldum's Gap, 20 or so metres beneath the Argonaut's ironclad's gleaming hull. The Sigmarite strongpoint was an unlovely hovel, nestled between two flat-topped hills and surrounded by a palisade of solid iron oak. It was cramped and rain-swept, its squat buildings semi-permanently obscured by a swirling grey-blue mist that chilled to the bone. "No, indeed," said Cruffin. "Though they've paid well for our help in mopping up those Grobbai raiders, you can't deny. Cycle stone's not ether gold, to be sure, but it'll sell well enough at Goldnill's market. Should earn the crew a nice little windfall." Such pleasant thoughts were interrupted by a muted horn blaring far below. The sound was coming from one of the human watchtowers. Cruffin could see soldiers rushing back and forth, waving their hands and gesturing. "Something out there," Thrummond muttered, squinting towards the valley that spread out ahead of the human settlement. As ever, the immediate terrain was masked beneath a thick carpet of fog hanging low in the heavy air. "Thought I saw..." Admiral Cruffin thumbed down the magnoscope lens of his helmet and scanned the mist. At first, he saw nothing. Then something burst from the clouds, a chunk of rock the size of a main engine. He briefly lost sight of the missile, flipping back his viewing lens in time to see it crush down atop the perimeter wall of Veldum's Gap. It left a red smear behind as it bounced into the settlement proper, before finally punching through the side of a house. More stones followed, more screams, and more thudding sounds of impact. "Beat to quarters!" Cruffin roared. "Bring us about, Captain Thrummond! Clear the guns for action!" The crew of the Grimmbar exploded into motion, Argonauts dashing forward to detach mooring lines and load the ironclad's cannons. Cruffin glanced across the deck to see Gunnery Sergeant Boffelson and half a dozen of his ground-stock marines taking up firing positions, levelling sleek ether-shot rifles and handheld mortars towards the source of the commotion. "Grung these bulls," said Captain Thrummond, as half a dozen gigantic forms lumbered out of the mists, brandishing makeshift clubs and hollering drunkenly as they bore down upon Veldum's Gap. "Karag Gronti! Karag Gronti!" Mega gargants. A storm of boulders and torn-up tree trunks hammered down on the settlement, crushing panicked human soldiers flat, or smearing them across the cobblestones. One of the gargants took an awkward run-up and put his foot through the strongpoint's main gate. Metal and wood crumpled, and the foolish brute staggered, cursing and grabbing at his bloody toes, much to the whooping amusement of his fellows. Another wiped his hand across the battlements, snatching a pair of flailing humans and tossing them over his shoulders to their death. A squadron of 3 single-engine gun-stock gun haulers came angling down from their patrol route. The escort ship's 4 cannons blared, and puffs of red smoke rippled along the Gargant's torsos. One vessel was caught by the edge of a Gargant's wildly swung war club. Spiralling crazily, it struck the hillside and burst into flames. Now the Grimbar's own heavy guns opened up in earnest. Zilfin-cast smooth-bore cannons roared, unleashing a storm of superheated ether shot upon the advancing Titans. One of the mega gargants roared in agony, a hand reduced to bloody tatters. Another swayed, poking dumbly at a smoking hole in its skull through which brain matter could be glimpsed. The brutes now turned their piggish eyes upon the ironclad. The largest, a grizzled, one-eyed devil whose head was enclosed in a beast's skull, bellowed a command. Cruffin felt an uneasy sensation as he met the greybeard's stare. This was not the dull, bleary visage of your typical gargant. Those eyes betrayed cunning and a bottomless well of hatred. Each of the Alpha Titan mob reached down to grasp a handful of debris or loose stone. Tongues protruding ridiculously in concentration, they took aim at the Grimmbar. "Brace for impact!" Cruffin cried. At the rear of the ironclad, Captain Thrummond cursed and strained as he hauled on the ship's wheel, trying to reduce the Grimbar's profile to face the coming barrage. Metal groaned as the vessel yawned violently to the left. Too late. As the first projectile, the crumpled ruin of the strongpoint's main gate, slammed into the Grimbar's hull, the deck tipped almost vertically. An Orkanaut flailing past Admiral Cruffin, screaming. More impacts. Thud, thud, thud. Crumpling bulkheads and pulverizing gun turrets. Something exploded. A loose Grunsettler warhead below the keel, perhaps? Before he could lock his mag boots in place, a scalding shockwave ripped the Admiral from his perch and sent him skidding across the deck in a shower of sparks. The Grimmbar entered a lurching spin. Smoke spewed from the punctured engine. Cruffin cursed, unable to halt his momentum as he slid towards empty air and a 20-metre fall. "I've got you, sir!" Strong hands seized him by the arm. Gunny Boffleson and two of his marines had wrapped a low chain around themselves and the laboured pump valve and were clinging desperately on as Captain Thrummond fought to wrestle the ironclad level. Somehow he managed it, bringing the vessel to a halt just above ground level. But no sooner had the ship pulled out of its death spiral than a monstrous, leering face appeared at the bow, directly in front of the Grimbar's main sky cannon. Grabbing hold of the forerail with one gnarled hand, the Mega Gargant snatched up the dazed Karajan gunner strapped into its firing seat. It stuffed the poor wretch into his mouth, biting down with a sickening crunch. "Dramacas!" cursed Admiral Cruffin, and his volley pistol buckled in his hand, spitting ether shot into the brute's eyes. He strode across the deck towards the Gargant, still firing, as Boffleson and his remaining marines opened up with their own fusillade. The Gargant howled, raising a hand to fend off the storm of ether shot. A mortar shell struck its palm, splattering the Grimbar's deck with flesh and gore. Cruffin reached the forward sky cannon, hardly thinking about the danger, so terrible was his rage. He heaved his suit-clad bulk into the seat and grabbed hold of the firing lever. A flashing rune told him there was a shell already nestled in the breach. The wounded Gargant loomed over him, mouth open in a spittle-flecked roar, bits of Duardan flesh stuck in its teeth. It raised its war club overhead, ready to finish off the stricken ironclad. Cruffin pulled the lever. There was a blinding glare of light and a thunderous report. The Sky Cannon's high-yield Zumbrak bore ammunition was designed to pierce several inches of reinforced steel. It easily punctured through flesh and bone, detonating inside the target's belly. The Mega Gargant collapsed in two wet chunks. Any satisfaction Cruffin found in the kill swiftly evaporated when he hauled himself out of the gunnery seat and took in the carnage of the Grimmbar's main deck. One of the main engines was gushing smoke and ether gas. Rivets had torn loose, exposing the innards of the skyship. He could see fires raging in the hold. Corpses rolled back and forth gently as the Grimmbar rocked. Somewhere, a klaxon blared pitifully. Captain Thrummond was slumped against the ship's wheel, wheezing, his salt and pepper beard streaked with blood. "Status, Captain," Cruffin barked. "She's about done for, Admiral," the old Dwarding gasped. "Both engines breached, and the rear stabilizers shorn away. Can barely keep her in the air." The words struck the heart out of Loki Cruffin. Most of the crew dead, an entire wind cycle of profit and progress snatched away in an instant. His grand dreams of returning to the windswept city with a hull full of ether gold and a record of service that even the Admiral's Council couldn't ignore. All done for. An admiral that lost an ironclad was a pariah. He might never be trusted with a fleet master's commission again. "Get yourself to the ground, Admiral," said Thrummond, grimacing as he dragged himself upright. A slither of metal as thick as a boarding hook had punctured his bodysuit just below the heart. "There's nothing to be done about it now." "Come with us, sir," Boffleson said, in a voice that brooked no disagreement. "Time to go." The Admiral staggered after Gunnery Sergeant and his Marines in a daze, flinching as another Gargant hurled missile whooshed overhead, missing his skull by mere feet. Almost in a daze, he secured himself to the grav ladder and hauled himself over the gunwale, then felt his stomach twist in lurch as he dropped down to the earth a dozen meters below. His warsuit's geometric stabilizers whirled as he struck hard rock, absorbing an impact that might otherwise have shattered both his legs. The Grimmbar soared low overhead, trailing smoke. Captain Thrummond might not be able to operate full payload alone, but the Grunstettler ram mounted on the ironclad's prow was a more than potent weapon. The dying vessel ploughed straight into one of the Gargants, crumpling its skull and sending it flying backwards. Somehow, Thrummond kept on a smooth bearing despite the impact, bringing the Grimmbar around and hurtling now towards the leader of the Carag Gronti, the one-eyed killer with the skull helm. "Come on," muttered Admiral Cruffin. "Bring the Wazzock down." But this Mega Gargant was too savvy for that. He turned to the nearest building, a small Sigmarite chapel, and put his massive hands around the structure's narrow spire. Muscles bulged and veins popped in the brute's neck as he ripped the length of the iron free and hurled it like a javelin at the approaching airship. It struck the main engine. There followed a terrible detonation as the super-compressed gases stored within the metal sphere detonated, sending the Grimmbar lurching to the side in a slow, inevitable descent. Admiral Cruffin watched, numb with despair, as the ironclad came crashing down atop Veldman's Gap. The ironclad pulverised an entire row of squat buildings, crumpling under the terrible strain of the impact. The forward section of the vessel tore loose, rising up and flipping over before slamming down with tremendous force. So perished a proud flagship of the Barak Zilfin shipyards, and with it died Loki Cruffin's hopes and dreams. With the death of the Grimmbar, the Mega Gargants turned their attention back to the strong point itself. Cruffin could hear their gwarfing as they proceeded to smash the settlement flat, squashing buildings and fleeing townsfolk beneath their feet. Despair turned to cold rage as Cruffin heard the screams of the dying. Guilt too. He had taken payment from these folks on the promise that he would keep them safe. He slammed the butt of his scarf hammer down. "Boffleson," he shouted, and the gunnery sergeant stepped forward. "Gather your marines. We're going to get as many Ungi out of that death trap as we can." Boffleson hesitated. "Sir, it's in our contract to keep you alive, nothing else." "I know. I wrote the damn thing. But I'm going in there, so if you want to get paid, you best follow sharpish. These people hired me to defend them, and I'll be a land-lubbing firebeard before I break my word." After all, thought Cruffin, when an officer of the fleet failed so spectacularly, what was he left with but his honour?